This is the Authentic Change Podcast, and I am Mike Horne. Authenticity reflects what we want from each other and our organizations: open communication, trust, community, fun, and opportunity. I want to help you to do your best in your personal and professional relationships. This podcast delivers expertise, insights, and approaches on authentic leadership, to live your purpose, to lead from your values, to establish connected relationships, to steward people and culture change, to build and sustain prosperity, and to open doors and possibilities. This podcast will assist you in paving the way forward to personal, team, and organizational prosperity. Welcome, everyone, to the Authentic Change Podcast. I am absolutely delighted today to have as our guest Courtney Burton. I've met Courtney over the last several months, and she has inspired me to engage in new ways of thinking. And I was so inspired by my conversation with her. I said, Courtney, you have got to be a guest on the Authentic Change Podcast. She is an influential voice, creating a space in learning for all of us. And like I said to you, I got hooked at the first bite. She's an influential voice in creating a space of learning and a passion for self-inquiry. Oh, there's the testament, right? She is all about curiosity, helping others to explore the magic and possibilities of their greatness in every day. It so resonates with everything we do in authentic leadership, with the concepts of prosperity. And she's a career and wellness living transition coach. She brings her life lessons and her experience from over 25 years, get this, as a national retail director, a sales executive, and a jazz vocalist. She just brings a heart-centered approach and a practical coaching methodology that helps people to discover their authentic, creative selves. And again, I am so delighted to welcome Courtney. Courtney, could you say a few words about yourself and welcome?
Oh, thank you so much, Mike. I feel humbled and honored to be part of your podcast today. And I just want to echo the fact that, boy, we bonded quickly when we first met. Even with Zoom, it's amazing what we can all do these days. And I love what you stand for and what you're about in really integrity by design. And that's something that appealed to me right away. So, because I'm all about designing our lives, because we live by default so much. And as I used the phrase when we first met, those of us who are not 20 anymore, we understand that is, we really have a lot more control over what happens in our lives than we think when we're living by design.
Right. Can you say some more about that? What are some of the control factors that we have? I think that would be important to our audience because we discuss this ability to live authentically, to match our words and our actions. What are some of your insights or comments in that regard?
Well, in that regard, I think the word authenticity, it's kind of like integrity. It gets, people talk about it, but what's your personal definition of it? Because once we have our own definition of that, then we can start to see where the gaps are, where we're not living that way. And, is authenticity a value? Is it a virtue? Is it a trait? How do you want to have that show up in your life? And when we talk about being our authentic selves, I think there's, we talk about being real or genuine, but none of that comes through unless you've done the self-work to find out who you really are and what you want to be. Self-inquiry is not for the faint of heart, as you well know. It really isn't.
Courtney, you have such a fabulous background. And while I don't want to dwell on the past and I want to focus on what you're doing today, could you give some perspective on what you were up to in your career in the past?
I was in retail for many, many years, both, as we like to call it, on both sides of the desk. So I worked for a mass retailer, a drug store retailer, and a food retailer in my career, both in-store and at headquarters. I was a buyer for many years and a merchant, did support functions for the merchants at one company as well. And then I went on the sales side. So I actually sold to a major retailer and got to have this amazing, well-rounded career in all things retail and how we buy and how we spend money and what shopping does for humans, because it's really much more emotional than people think.
Oh, and it's I have to imagine, because often when people think about integrity, the negative connotations arise in sales, where people feel that they weren't treated honestly, they weren't treated fairly. So you must have a wealth of experience. For one large mass clothing retailer for whom I consulted, I was so impressed. It was Gap International. And at Gap, they had at the time a zero tolerance policy for child labor. And it affected the way that they did business. And it also extended, I think, to certain places where facilitation payments were a normal way of doing business. And Gap also introduced a zero tolerance policy on that. And it spoke to the way that corporations shift our ways of thinking about honesty and integrity. And I wonder what your perspectives on that, having been on both a buy side and a sell side.
Yes, absolutely. I think as we've all gotten more aware of what's behind the curtain in our desire to have, things that make our lives easier. The big companies are the ones that have been driving a lot of the changes that need to happen. Child labor, selling cigarettes. I was with one retailer many, many, many years ago when they made the decision not to sell cigarettes. That doesn't sound like a big deal now, but 20 years ago, let alone, when you think about the financial impact for the company at the time, it was a big statement. But now that's kind of, where do you buy cigarettes if you're, we don't even think about it now. Child labor for sure. Now I love what's happening with most companies of size. Like, what is your carbon footprint? How do we change this? How do we have a better world? I think that's all part of this conversation, if you're about integrity and authenticity as someone who has the influence to make that happen for all of us.
So where did the music fit in? As a vocalist, as a jazz vocalist, was this the soul redeeming part of your life, or what? Where was that?
How did that happen? Yeah, I love those twists of fate, as it were, or divine intervention, depending on your point of view. I'm going to tell a little bit of a backstory. I had a kindergarten teacher who had this amazing voice. And I just remember sitting there as little Courtney at 5, completely awestruck when she sat at the piano, completely awestruck. And it just sparked this love of music. I was also, at the age of 4, an aficionado on all things Lawrence Welk, but that's a whole different story.
That is a different story.
I fell in love with Lawrence Welk show as a little kid. So then fast forward to junior high, I started singing a bit, and I was told I didn't have a good voice, and I believed it. So I said that I was an alto frog, is what I called myself. And I happened to be singing in the shower at college freshman year. And literally singing in the shower, somebody said, "Hey, we need help for choir at chapel. You want to come?" And I'm like, "Who are you talking to? What? And that's how it started. So I actually started taking lessons and realized this alto frog voice was a true contralto. Fast forward 15 years after college, I had not sung. I had told somebody, yeah, I used to do weddings and things. They said, "Hey, somebody's looking for a vocalist for a big band. You want to audition?" I was like, "Really?" I did. It was horrible. I'll be the first to admit it was bad. And I have been their vocalist almost consistently for over 20 years now.
Oh my goodness.
So and I never thought it would be big band music. And it was my godsend. When things got really stressful at work, I would go to band rehearsal, or I would go and have a gig, and I just sit there and I think, God, am I blessed? I get to hang out with 20 really cool musicians. Some of these guys live this music the first time around. And it was just this way of incorporating all of Cortney, right? That bringing all of me together in that one spot, taking this very business-oriented person but being able to use those skills to actually create music for others and find my personal joy, but also bring joy to others. It's been awesome.
I'm thinking about the story, and not the one related to Lawrence Welk, but related to the teacher in junior high school who said you.
Well, actually, it was my peer group.
Peer group. It was peer group.
Yes, it was not a teacher. It was a peer group.
That's great. That's great to hear. It wasn't a teacher.
No.
But it does go to the heart, I think, of authentic leadership and where we learn about leadership. For me, when I think about authentic leadership, trust is at the heart of it. Trust is at the heart of authentic leadership. Can I trust on? And that's when we can get into the discussions, should I lie? Can I lie? I say, please don't ask me those questions. But what I do know is that when we're not honest, it erodes trust and it makes it difficult to go further. But there are two things I want to capture in your story, which are so interesting as it relates to the topic of trust and its extension to authentic leadership. Is at one point, someone capitalized on your strengths. And that, to me, isn't an act of trust. I trust you enough. I am leading, I'm managing. I have enough faith in you that I really want to capitalize on your strengths. I don't even have to have enough faith in you, but I believe in you. And I will work our trust in our relationship in order to capitalize on your strengths. But one thing that we also know about trust is that in a trustworthy relationship, we're able to have realism and openness. And I'm able to sometimes, paint a picture that's different. So I have these contrasting stories which are so wonderfully illustrated by someone who capitalized on those strengths when you were young, finding that gift of voice. And then later with the peer group saying, well, maybe not so much. And then later another peer, coming back and saying, oh, you sound pretty good. So, as you think about that and given all of your business experience and what you're doing today, and helping others on their wellness journeys and on their other important journeys in life, where do we balance on this? How do we capitalize on strengths and how do we be real with people at the same time?
I think so much of it has to do with knowing what you need, like the core essence of what you need to thrive versus survive. And I use those terms quite a bit. And that was one of those moments that a coach said to me. I had hired a leadership coach at what turned out to be a critical point in my own career. And she just looked at me one day and said, you're spending way too much of your energy surviving. What would it take for you to thrive? And it stopped me dead in my tracks because I'd never thought of that. And I think when we talk about leveraging our strengths, if we're not aware of what they are and we don't demonstrate them on a regular basis and have the confidence in our strengths to demonstrate them, how do we expect others to leverage them?
Mm-hmm. It's almost the contrast between, in our trust relationship, being tough and being empathetic. Right?
Absolutely. And that's self-empathy as well. Because I think in our culture, a lot of people don't trust their own abilities because of perfectionism, comparing to others. We live in a social media world. I personally don't know how authentic social media is a lot of times, just saying.
Oh, sure.
Right. And so we don't trust our own abilities in that.
Our self-worth, how many likes did I get today? How many views were seen? Am I posting frequently enough? All of the questions that raise this self-doubt and perhaps, don't really work towards a realistic picture or view of who we are.
But others know.
Yes.
It's pretty remarkable. As a coach, frequently people go, wow, how did you know that? And I want to say, I'm telling you what you've just told me in different words.
Yes.
I see your greatness, the greatness of yourself that you don't see.
And that is a key for those who are coaching and advancing authentic leadership. It is the ability to trust others.
Yes.
And, we could go all along the debate in social behavior whether trust is freely given or whether it needs to be earned, and it's different for different folks.
Yes.
Where do you come at that in sort of your approach to coaching? I mean, given all the experience you've had in organizations of substance and in leading others, where do you land on those issues around
On trust? Yeah, I have to admit, I could make up a lot of stories about it, but as my first inclination I have is I'm wary about people at first. Now I intuit into people pretty fast, but there's a part of me that always says, who are you and what are you about first?
Yes.
Yeah,
And
that's how but I know that is something I do, and I temper that where it's needed because I know myself well enough to know what that might lead to.
right.
And there's also a part of me that I always believe in positive intent at first, unless my spidey senses are up.
Right. And sure, doesn't it all start there with this sense of who we are and then who am I
Yes.
to you, right? And who are you to me?
Exactly.
Because I think the compelling need that we have in life is to be understood. And just as you described with the client situation, often we're engaged in those active listening techniques that we learned from Carl Rogers and others that, yes, I am really attending to you at this moment. But then I wonder what moves us from that understanding, or maybe there isn't any movement because maybe it's understanding that helps us move towards authenticity. But what takes us from, what creates the movement to, okay, you've heard my story. I trust you enough that I want you to be on my journey with me, whether that's a 3-month coaching journey, a 6 months or a year-long or multi-year journey. What's the difference there? What's the difference that you make, Courtney?
Well, one of the things I tell people when we first connect is I want to make sure that whatever decision they make about keeping me into their journey or not, that they feel really good about it. And this goes back to our conversation about sales. I never thought of myself as a sales lady. Bottom line is we're selling all the time, every day, to everybody we talk to, including ourselves. But that's a whole other conversation. So, and I don't do sales. It's like I'm either your coach or I'm not. So I open the space for them to feel really good about making a decision that works for them.
And you're working in lots of areas now, or
Yes.
arenas, right, in terms of personal growth and personal change. Can you describe some of those?
Yes, it's all about transitions. And we're, as humans, whether we want to believe it or not, we're always in some cycle of transitions in almost every part of our lives. I concentrate on helping people really get clear back to thriving versus surviving of what they need to thrive in the work environment. So this is kind of the pre-work before you go out there and start doing I've got to put my LinkedIn resume of all that stuff we do. It's like, no, figure out what your ideal list is first, and then try to get as close to that ideal as possible. And if you know you're making some compromises, go in eyes wide open with that and figure out where you're going to get your needs met elsewhere. The other place I concentrate on is moving from a diet mentality to a well-living mentality. So people who've been yo-yo dieters their whole lives, it's tough. Been there, done that. My corporate career actually exacerbated that tendency in myself for years. And then I realized I got to figure this out on my own. So I actually help people create their own well-living toolkit. There's no one size fits all. And it's not a process for the faint of heart, that's for sure. But people, again, you create this space where you can have choice in the matter. And it's amazing the results people get from that.
You really are working, through the issues of and the elements of transition, helping people, it sounds like, to let go, to have a sense of loss around. And that is all about transition because it means that you need to be able to, if you want to set a goal and achieve it, to be able to bounce back, to refresh your ability to learn while all of this other stuff is happening, I've got a new vision. I've got to reorganize this. I've got to rethink the way I'm, eating. So you got all that sort of, left brain logic going on. Wow, we need to attend to all the letting go, holding on. What Bill Bridges used to say was that it wasn't so much that people were in love with the past that they can't let it go, or that they're so in fear of the future that they can't embrace it. It's everything in between.
It's all the in between. It's that in the meantime, that gap between this is where I am now and that's the vision I have there.
And he used to describe it as the time, if you're familiar with the character in the Snoopy cartoon, Linus. He's the character that carries around a blanket with him. And he describes, Bill Bridges described the period of transition as if we could put our shoes in, if we could put our feet in Linus's shoes when his blanket was in the washer or in the dryer.
Yes.
And that's when,
that's exactly what it's like.
is that time. And, the challenges that, back to our organizational settings, and, we can take this back into the personal realm again too, but success in leadership, requires so many things, right? It requires, you've got to be competent. You've got to be able to challenge your own assumptions and people's assumptions. You've got to have a vision for what's possible. And, in most organizations, they're always saying, oh, can you build alliances and make things bigger, right? More of this, more of that, right?
More.
Yeah, more, right? And the other side around managing the transition, which you attend to, I think, is, what is the capacity to learn and to grow and to adapt? And how can I enable? How can I model? Right? I mean, I heard a little bit in your story that you had been there or experienced that in some ways. But it's really about having the authenticity and the integrity and the EQ and the right interpersonal skills to help people on this journey.
That reminds me of a situation I was in where I had moved. A company was in the middle of a reorg, and they actually were bringing new people in from all over the country, actually a couple of folks from Canada. And life happened, and not too soon after I'm going to say it's less than a year, I think, the company was being sold. And I panicked. I'm like, crap, I just moved halfway across the country. What am I going to do now? And I had a fairly big team at the time. And I said, wait, okay, Court, put your oxygen mask on first. And I figured out my worst case scenario. My worst case scenario was actually pretty simple. I would sell a fairly reasonably priced townhome that wasn't that far from a university. And the worst case would be I'd pack up my things and move into my parents' basement. That was my worst case scenario and find a new job. Once I took care of myself, I was able to deal with my team in a whole different way as a leader. So I set up, they were like, what's going on? What's the information? Because it was constant change when you're going through something like that. And so I set up every Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays. I said, meet in this conference room at 8:00 in the morning. I will tell you what I can for updates, so you will get them as quickly as possible. And if you ask me a question that I am not privileged to tell you the answer to, I will let you know I can't answer that.
It took a tremendous amount of courage to do that, I think.
It was one of the most difficult things I've ever done as a manager, and also one of the most rewarding.
Right. Truly, you're demonstrating some self-reliance here because what you're describing is knowing and owning your personal strengths and your development needs and your vulnerabilities. You couldn't do any of that without having some good basis of self-awareness, Courtney.
And that's why I had hired coaches. That was the result of having coaches in my life, and really awesome support along the way with family and friends. So,
as you work with people who come to you for help, I think help is a great word. It's an honorable word. It's part of what defines what we do. What are the ways in which you engage them, or how do they engage with you?
Well, I like to have some structure on our conversations. It's more than a conversation. Yes, we will talk about what the roadblocks are, what your desires are. But at some point, fairly early into the relationship, we hone in on what's the desired outcome for us working together. Let's actually do some test and learn, put some structures in place. I use assessments. We talk through quite a bit, and there's always an inspired action afterwards. So this is not just having a conversation. You got to like chop wood, carry water. We got to get into life and get some things done along the way as well.
That's amazing. And because what you're doing is you're helping to create a vision and you're accompanying it with an action step. Mm-hmm. So it's both concept and practice at the same time. And
then something else I encourage, depending on why people come to me for help, I encourage them, even if it's only for a couple of weeks, to actually track hydration and sleep. Why? Because sleep is completely underrated in our country, but you don't make the best decisions when you're not rested and you're underhydrated. And when people get a glimmer of, oh, I feel so much better, I'm like, okay, maybe that's a habit you can tweak on your own. We can work on it together. Sounds crazy if you came to me about a career change you want to make, but that's a big decision to make when you're not actually in your best physical shape to do that.
You have to be almost ready for the decision, right? It even maybe transcends or goes beyond what it means to be authentic, right? Because when we're authentic, our words and our actions and our ways of thinking are in alignment. Mm-hmm. But if I can't even figure out the question for myself, it makes it pretty tough to stay in a confused, the result is a confused state, which is...
It's not going to move you forward at all. The other thing I do tap into people and say, how do you feed your soul? And that's my way of getting that. Okay, what's the muse saying? Because I talk about feeding the muse. She will want to be honored. She can be quite the mistress. And invariably somebody went, oh man, I used to play guitar, or I really like to paint, or I don't care if it's cooking or gardening, but if you do that once a week, even, again, your decision-making will be probably in a better place because you'll be closer to your true self. You're honoring the all of you at that point.
Well, that takes a lot of courage for people to do. We're almost working at these ideas about, polarities, right? That I can be more of who I am by claiming more of what I usually engage in, right? Understanding and assessing that. That requires a lot of courage for people, I think, to take on.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a lot of time, though. Even if it is simply 15 minutes. When I was at one point, when stress got a little more out of control than usual, I bought a spirograph. Do you remember a spirograph as a kid?
Sure, it's the thing that you stuck a writing instrument in and it spun around some wheels. Right.
I did that on Friday nights for a while, and it sounds just for an hour, but I'd sit there with a bunch of colored pencils and channel my inner child. And it was just this way of going, whew. I just calmed down, like, okay, it's way better than a pepperoni pizza or something else that was destructive, right?
I think it's like a labyrinth walk.
Exactly.
I think it's very much that process of slowing it down to reflect and to speed things up as needed. Courtney, one of the things that you've written and that you've said is that by embracing our true self, we can relate to others from a place of compassion. That compassion is the fuel to co-create a joyful, loving, peaceful world for humanity. So powerful. Where is the gravitas, the inspiration?
Well, I realize when you talk to a lot of people, and over the years, I've talked to a lot of people. I'm one of those folks that people just tell me their life story. I'm just sitting there. I'm like, okay, I'll listen. That's cool. At the end of the day, that's all anybody really wants. We want to experience joy. We want to make sure we provide for our families. We want a peaceful environment where we can all thrive. And I sat back after reviewing all these conversations, and I went, if that's all everybody wants that I've run into, and that's not just Americans, international travel too, that's what you get. It's like, well, how do we get there? And it's really about being back to trust. It's about being able to trust yourself, to trust others, so that you can just go, this is who I am. And I know that I'm safe and it's all good. And that's self-compassion.
It is part of your mission, really, isn't it? I mean, around helping people who are in the thick of things in terms of career to reconnect with their values and to experience, I mean, living by design versus living by default, as you say.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it. And our values, values are verbs. I met a gentleman who, I love this. He says, creativity is one of his values. And so he actually said, how do I creativity this? How do I creativity that? That was a phrase that I heard this person say. I thought, how cool is that?
I've heard someone recently do a presentation on how do you make your brand a verb? Like, oh, I'm going to Google this,
yes.
right?
right. But yeah.
His examples weren't working for me. He was, I Coke this, or, but I love what you're doing in this space and in this regard, because,
Thank you.
For values, I mean, they underlie everything that comes into authentic leadership. At least I'm driven by a set of humanistic values, which I think fuel what authentic leaders do: respect, dignity, growing diverse ideas and people around you to grow inclusion. I mean, all of those things matter.
They matter. And it's okay, I think, to realize where you have gaps between your behaviors and what you say your values are, because that's the growth edge right there. That's the growth edge.
So rich. And to, how do we think about closing the gap between what's possible and what's probable? How do we change in ways that not only fuel our own spirit, but those around us? I mean, you're presenting a blueprint for that, Courtney, in your work with others that's just so rewarding and challenged, and I think honored by your spirit and your intent that you're bringing to this work.
Oh, thank you, Mike. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I find that my experience of what my clients experience, put it that way, is that they feel heard and honored and to some degree nurtured. Right? One of the things that I realized about myself is I create safe spaces. I do that with my music. I do that in my coaching. I do that when I entertain my friends. It's just that's just who I be.
Well, you inspire trust, and that inspires confidence, and you have a serene state that makes others feel, that makes me feel a possibility for openness and for growth and for enrichment. And that's all pretty amazing. If you were going to give our listeners and our audience, Courtney, a few pieces of advice on the journeys in which you guide people, what would they be?
One of the biggest lessons I've learned, there's two that come to mind. One is, as I've gotten older, I have learned to discern what's worth the effort. Is it worth the fight? Is it worth the battle or not? And some things, if you ask yourself that question, you step back, you're like, you know what? That's not worth the energy. It's okay. It'll fix itself. It'll take care of itself. The other most important lesson I ever learned was from my mother. I was just coming out of college. My life didn't look the way I thought it was going to. I was bemoaning that fact in the kitchen one day, and she just looked at me and she said, "Whose script are you reading?" Whoa. Whose script are you reading? In other words, you get to write your script, and you own it when you write it, but you get to write your script. And that has been, I mention that to a lot of people when I talk to them, like, whose script are you reading? Is your life by your design or somebody else's?
Your mother gave you the greatest privilege of a lifetime.
Oh my gosh, especially at 20. Unbelievable.
Amazing. Courtney, this time is too short. And I know if I was in the listening audience today, I would want to get in touch with you, and I'd want to be in touch with your work. What are the ways, or how are the ways that people could be in touch with you?
Oh, thank you, Mike. Well, Courtney Burton Music is the website for my music business, and Courtney Burton Coaching, I keep it simple, for coaching is the website for that. And I'm also on LinkedIn. Those are the best ways to reach me.
That's just super. So Courtney Burton Music for the music site, and Courtney Burton Coaching for the other services. That is elegant in its simplicity. I appreciate that. Somebody was reading to me a website yesterday. It had so many like dots in it. I couldn't figure it out after a while. So Courtney Burton Music, Courtney Burton Coaching, or on LinkedIn. Those are a few ways, and I'm sure that those will all lead you directly to Courtney and ways to get in touch with her.
Absolutely.
It's been such an honor and a privilege for me, and I hope for our audience to hear the strengths and the gifts that you're bringing and the talents that you're unleashing in the world that can help others to become more of who they are and bring more of what they do to organizations. As we transition from workplaces to worker centricity, this idea about creating community, about being able to join community, and about bringing your authentic self to work becomes increasingly important. And I think you can support, Courtney Burton, can support others on that journey.
Oh, thank you, Mike. It is my mission in life. It is my mission in life to have people bring their full selves, no matter where they are. I love the saying now, just do you, boo. Just do you.
Just do you, boo. Again, thank you, Courtney Burton. Please reach her on Courtney Burton Music or Courtney Burton Coaching, or visit with her on LinkedIn in ways to be in touch. This has been another terrific episode of the Authentic Change podcast. So honored to have our guest, Courtney Burton. And until the next episode, stay well. Thanks for listening. And I hope you'll subscribe today and tell a friend about our show. If you're looking for hands-on help to increase your success through authentic change, or have a question you'd like to hear me answer here, please email me at mike@mike-horne, HORNE.com.